Hi everyone. So what I'm going to talk about today is, due to popular request, is emotions and possibly personal trauma or trauma, um, and how that fits in with awakening and non-duality. I want to make it clear to begin with that I'm not a professional, a mental health professional. I'm not a psychotherapist. Although I have some training and experience with counselling, I'm not a practicing counsellor. I'd like to make this clear that all I'm doing here is describing my own experience. So please don't put a lot of weight in what I'm saying as something that should be this way, or an approach or an alternative to evidence-based therapies, conventional therapies. I'd just like to make that clear, because what I don't want to do is mislead people. What I don't want to do is cause harm by not being clear about what I'm doing here. I don't want to overstep my area of competence. I don't want to step into an area where I'm not competent and potentially give advice and guidance where it's not safe and effective for me to do so. So all I'm doing here is describing my own experience, and there is a reason why I almost exclusively only talk about or point to the insight, the realization, because that's what's clear to me. What I don't have a tendency to do is go into my personal story and give it a kind of more relative perspective of the story about what happened here, which I might do a little bit here today. So it may well be appropriate or necessary to seek professional counsel or therapies. 100%. Non-duality is not an alternative to evidence-based therapies. 100%. So just to make that clear, so I was talking to some people over email about this. Someone asked me if there was intense suffering, and although it's not the case right now, although that's not here right now in this moment, there was a time where suffering was profound to an immense degree, which almost led to, on a few occasions, physical death. The suffering was something that the only way I knew how to deal with it, the only thing that seemed to work temporarily to escape from myself, was to use alcohol and substances to a dangerous extent. Eventually, I've talked about this at length before, I recovered from that with a lot of work, with a lot of emotion work, a lot of self-reflection. A great deal of understanding about what is happening here, which was the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which not anonymous anymore. I've just put it on out in front of 1,000 people, but which directly led into a deeper inquiry, which led, like I explained before, to a form of awakening, which then deepened itself. What led me to try and escape from myself, to try and escape from this life, in more ways than one, was profound suffering, a constant feeling of not rightness, a constant feeling of isolation, of struggling to understand and relate to the world in a way that felt real and intimate and normal. An enormous part of that was the feeling of living as a self, the emotions involved. My emotions, how I feel as the one living my life. And I guess you could say that there were experiences that instilled a deep fear, a deep emotional unrest that I went through, I suppose, when I was growing up, when I was younger. Trauma. Which I always talk about, ultimately it all came back to this question of why, what am I doing here, what is this? A question of death, existence, life, non-existence. It all came back to that, and at the core of that was a kind of background feeling of restlessness and dis-ease, a background feeling of not rightness, a struggling to make sense of this, a struggling to make sense of the experiences I'd had, what I see in this world, that I found deeply unsettling, deeply frightening, terrifying. You know, I could describe specific events. The specifics don't matter. What matters about it is the powerful aversion from what I had experienced, and the powerful aversion from what I was experiencing in the moment, of deep fear, of terror, of sorrow and sadness. Because of this, I guess you could link it back to specific events where there was this powerful and potent yearning for this feeling of not rightness to be reconciled in some way, to be able to escape from experience, to be able to escape from those emotions, to be able to escape from being bound to feel, being bound to live. And escape from existing as a small, limited entity in a giant and mysterious world among other entities, which I didn't quite understand. At the heart of that, there was just like, what is this? Why is this happening? Why are these traumatic experiences, why am I being subjected to this? What's the purpose of this? And there was I guess I was an emotionally sensitive person. So, relatively being exposed to certain life experiences had a deep and profound effect on me at the emotional level. And whenever one of these traumatic experiences came about, especially when I was younger, something stuck, and it didn't become apparent that this was happening in the body, somewhere in the energetics and the emotions of the body. And there was a learning or a reaction to that, a contemplation of that went like, that can't happen again. I have to avoid that to survive. I have to avoid that to survive. That can't happen again. I don't want that. So then there were tactics that came into it to almost, and this isn't fully at the conscious level, but tactics that came in to be able to make sure that that level of emotional distress, that fear, make sure that whatever that circumstance was, that event that came about that instilled such deep fear in me, such terror, as a survival mechanism, there was something about this mind body was being rewired to partially intuitively, partially consciously figure out how can I not feel that? How can I avert from that and control experience in my circumstances such that I can move towards what's not that, what is enjoyable, what is desirable, what is easy. Part of that was constructing an identity of me as opposed to my life, me as opposed to my feelings and my thoughts, my emotions, me as opposed to the world. So there was a distancing, a separation from that experience or the memory of that experience, and there was a kind of cognitive contemplation where I was trying to figure out how can I stop that from happening again. How am I going to organise and control my circumstances so that I don't have to feel that again? So, an obvious one for this, to put this into an example of how this manifests into a behaviour, which is the clear one for me, is that I was always afraid of violence because I had witnessed a lot of violence and been subject to violence. And I found it to be deeply unsettling and deeply frightening. So the movement that came from that was to separate myself from the violence, to control my circumstances, to be in a heightened, stressed state, an agitated state, such that I'm always aware of where there could be the threat of violence. It put me on edge, and a large part of that was the constant turning of the mental cogs, the constant vigilance, the constant stress mode, where that the memory of that energetically had stuck, had imprinted itself into my identity as a separate thing. So then I was always vigilant and looking for the evidence that that's going to come back, and I'm going to have to deal with that or feel that again. So there was this fear at the core of that, and this fear stayed with me, and it turned into anger, and anger at how could this even be? Why this experience? It turned into a kind of hatred for life, for the world, for other people, because I was seeing them as a threat to me, fundamentally, inherently apart from me. I was seeing it as other. I was seeing everyone through the veil, the filter of my survival mode that I had cultivated due to my traumatic experiences. So everyone I saw was a potential threat to some degree. This is, partially conscious, partially like subconscious. Because I started to view the world as a threatening place, an external hostile environment for a period of my life, there was a survival strategy that started to build, and it built itself up around fortifying this identity. Frank Yang described this in one of his old videos, the theory of Batman, and why Batman, he has a phobia of bats. He falls down into a well or something in the darkness underground, and the bats fly all around, like after his parents are murdered, and that traumatizes him. So what he does from this is he becomes the darkness, he becomes the Batman, because he has become his fear, he has merged with it, he is no longer separate from it, he embodies that fully. Thus, the phobia, the separation of him fearing the bat, is reconciled in that identity. I did the same thing. I fortified myself with the potential for violence to become what I was afraid of, and I did this through physical exercise, physical training, boxing, martial arts, jiu-jitsu, so on. So I developed this obsession with protecting myself by becoming that which I feared. I became actually obsessed with being physically more capable than everyone that I ever came across. Because there was so much emotional drive in that, what I achieved physically due to this expression of deep fear and trauma was quite incredible, actually. But at some point during that, I had developed the outstanding physical abilities, physical strength, or physical prowess, or whatever you'd like to call it, fitness, the capacity to exercise violence if I needed to protect the frightened person here and hear from a frightening external world out there. But at some point during that, there was something else started to come through, which was in order to develop exceptional physical abilities, there has to be a very direct exploration of physicality, a connection to this physical experience at a very deep and direct level to excel at something. And in doing that, there were the experiences of immersion in that moment, in the physical training, the physical exercises, flow states, states of simplicity, states of mental clarity, that part of me recognized that And that became part of the drive in doing this. So this suffering, this fear, this trauma, the deep need to escape my memories of experiences and the emotions, the emotional pain that come from that, and the psychological suffering. I went so far into experience at some point that something recognized itself. It was like training for me it was an obsession. It became a meditation. It started to kind of become like an inquiry. So then there started to become like a different type of, or there started to be a different type of expression in that wasn't driven by the narrative, that was partially driven by the trauma, but in the moment there was this expression of passion that came through, and it seemed to equip me with like superhuman abilities, like it was like it's strange, the conditions aligned themselves such that I got into these flow states. I developed a connection with physicality that transcended the person that was seeming to do this out of his own fears and insecurities, based on an aversion to trauma in life. And part of me recognized in those moments where it was pure freedom, although there was a whole identity based on this dysfunction, this repressed rage that I was channeling through this fear that I was channeling through this physical exercise. At some point in that, there was an opening, and that was the first opening into awakening. First awakening experiences that I had were flow states of complete immersion, where I was at one with the movement that was happening, the sensory experience of the body. I posted a quote by Michael Jackson in the comments. I can't remember it, but he describes when he's dancing, there is a merging, a forgetting of the person, a merging of that into the dance. So there's only the dancer and the dance merged together, and then it's just the dance. I totally relate to that. So in that there was kind of like a healing effect, where there was at some level there was a shift in focus away from the energetic effect of the seemingly negative trauma-based conditions that led to me doing these things. That continued, but there was something that was deeper than that, something that transcended that I got in touch with at a very direct and deep level. This is just one example, right? That these traumatic events kind of culminated in an identity. They remember I said how that left an imprint. It's stuck. Something stuck in this mind body, in this memory, and a lot of it was in thought, but it could be felt. There's this strange energetic thing that I don't understand, but it happened. It's like that emotion was stuck in time. I was carrying it around with me. Although the event was a memory, I was bringing that through this identification always here, reinforcing this narrative, feeding that wherever I went. And when I saw what I interpreted to be evidence of a threat, even though when it completely wasn't, I would have these reactions, these over the top reactions. So I used to have these aggressive outbursts a lot. I used to almost go around looking to reconcile that feeling of fear by instilling fear or the feeling of inferiority that I could recognize in other people, like so pathological, so dysfunctional. It never felt right. It always felt deeply not right. But somewhere in this, there was this opening. There was this and recognized something, and that's why whenever I read about Buddhism, I just knew. I was like, I know that is. I know that, and it cut through all of that. So the experience of this helplessness, the experience of of living as a separate entity, that fundamental illusion, that the not rightness, was reinforced by my circumstances, by my life experience, and it traumatized me. It brought about experiences that were felt to be me struggling with life, me struggling with a scary outside world, me fighting with life, me relating to my emotion in a deeply uncomfortable way. And it culminated, it built up into this identity, this narrative that was driven by delusion. It was driven by holding. It was driven by the need to avert from life, the need to separate from life, to protect myself, to keep myself safe from feeling, what I felt when I was a child. Sticks with you. So fast forward a little bit, the dysfunction continued into I found something that could get me out of it, and that was intoxication. And I realised that when I did that, all of this went away for a period of time. There was a solution. And it was much easier than, extremely extensive physical exercise. The passion at that level was still there, but there was a solution there. So it meant that I didn't have to feel this anymore. So I dove straight into it. Part of me was just like all in for that. This survival mechanism that was just trying to feel better, that was just trying to feel a bit of peace, to try and get away from this big existential problem of me as an identity in life. There seemed to be a solution. So at a survival level, I started engaging in these addictive behaviours because part of me was trying to survive this emotional turmoil, this turbulence, this not rightness. Of course, eventually that made things much worse. And when, it came to a certain point where the intoxicants were not working anymore, they were making things worse. The passion for, the physicality that I had, wasn't even noticeable anymore, and it was just like all hope was gone at a point, and that's when it got really bad. So then I had to go and do what is essentially like a form of therapy in recovery. It got to, I could tell you crazy stories that you wouldn't believe. You just wouldn't believe. Like, knowing David as he appears to you now on this channel, you wouldn't believe it. It would be unbelievable. But we don't need to go there. In recovery, I really started to look rather than run off of this circuit, this function of averting from parts of life that were painful to me, parts of experience, and compulsively going towards desirable experiences of intoxication, and the high and the low, the high and the low, the struggle that creates, the turmoil, internal turmoil that creates. It built up this horrible, confusing internal world that just didn't make any sense. It became itself very pathological and dysfunctional, and that was driving my life. It just didn't feel right. So I got into recovery, and for the first time I really looked at myself. I really looked back at what is actually going on here. Why is this happening? I talked to and I met people that were sober for a long time, and they were at peace. And I was that's possible. People recover from this, and they were at peace. And they were talking about meditation. They were talking about like Eckhart Tolle and stuff like that. And I was like, I have to be all in with this now. So I went all in with it, and in that I worked with a sponsor. I did a lot of essentially emotion work, reflection, behavioural therapy, strategies and stuff like that. And that was enough to heal to the extent, or work on myself to the extent where there could be abstinence. But in that abstinence, there was a whole tail end off of the intoxicants. And in the abstinence, there was a kind of high from that I got for a while in sobriety, and then it came back to the problem that was still here, and the problem was myself. The emotions that I was still feeling that weren't right. The fundamental question of birth, death, and existence. Why am I here? What is this experience? Why do I seem to be trapped inside this small body, and I have an end, I have a limit? Something about that didn't feel right. So there was a period where I engaged in the seeking thing, in a kind of intense way, and that extended out to various things that weren't even to do with spirituality. Like there was always this urgency, this restlessness, this discontentment that I couldn't just be still. I couldn't just sit and exist. I couldn't be me. It had to be me and then something, me relating to something, me doing something. There had to be an activity that was distracting me from this deep feeling of dis-ease. So I couldn't just exist comfortably, because this emotional accumulation was just there in the background. It got so uncomfortable. Then there was a time where the circumstances in my life changed. Everything seemed to move towards the better because I was sober. There were still the kind of mental ill health issues there, but they were being managed to a degree, and that wasn't anything really to do with myself or self-will. It was just my circumstances arranged that way. I was in a good relationship, had a good job and so on. I forgot all about that for a while, and then I casually got into the inquiry thing, just casually, without much of a drive, and then that's when things rapidly clarified. I would describe it like this. So with the initial shift in identity, with the awakening or the stream entry, I felt like I had, in my experience, I was directly in touch with and existing as that, in my experience, that I recognised, that I tapped into in those moments of directness and clarity. during exercise, my form of meditation. This is just part of the story, by the way. I'm omitting a whole load of stuff, of course. I'm just using this to illustrate a point. I started exercising again, and I noticed it was just there. I was like, that's why I did this. You know, all the conditions, the suffering that led to this, it was all because of this. That's why I did this. That's why I had the addiction to exercise. That's why I was seeking this. That's why I was performing dangerous stunts, taking massive risks, because it gave me this short peak experience of me not being here in the same way, of there being an immersion into something more total and complete. So I used to do like stunts and stuff like that, and crazy flips and whatnot, parkour and all that kind of stuff, lifting heavy weights and whatnot. All that stuff, I was like, that was for this. That's why I was doing that. There was a clarity with that, and as that came through in my experience, I got as close to it as possible. When there wasn't this constantly running narrative of me relating to my life, of me struggling with this and that, of me trying to move towards a better future, or trying to recover from this, or trying to feel better in this way, with the first shift, there was a closeness to my direct experience that became clear and came through when there wasn't the constant distraction of the narrative that was running in the background, that was, you know, constantly pulling my attention up into a space of thought, to avert from immediate physical reality, to avert from the senses, to find a safe space of refuge inside my internal world, apart from the external world. When that eventually calmed down, and it calmed down when I looked back and inquired into what I am here that is experiencing all this, that is experiencing life. What am I that has been here the whole time, that I'd lost touch with completely, because I was focusing on how to do this, how to get this or move towards that or avoid this. There was a simplicity and immediacy and experience that extended out into the senses, extended to the source of mind, the very consciousness or awareness, or I amness, that is at the core of my being, the beingness that is just here. But what came into awareness was my body as well, the body, and the feeling moving through and as this body, the emotions that are just here. I got more in touch with the emotions, and I realised that there was such tension here, such heightenedness here, like a jacked up nervous system that is like running off stress, that is exhausted because of this mental energy that is constantly being expended, because I feel like I need to protect myself from life, that I need to figure something out. You know, that not rightness was being generated in mind. And I described this in my very early videos. I said that I feel like the gaps have closed. I feel like this remembering, this recognition has brought everything from the past into now, and I feel it all now. I had some, I guess you could call it Kundalini stuff, like some very strong physical symptoms, energetic movements, where all that happened was there was an opening and an acceptance and an awareness of this physical experience. There wasn't attention being moved away from it constantly and ignoring. The emotions that were allowed to come through, and they came through bundled up with and entangled with thought forms that were structured around them, that gave them a history, an identity, a narrative, a meaning, a label of good or bad, I should do this to control it type of thing. All of that started coming to the surface immediately in experience, with the loss of the reality of this mind-made self. What I started to notice was that there was a physical, visceral, I guess you could say biological, or I don't know if that's that accurate, or energetic sensation, a sense experience that I could feel that was somehow distinct from what the thoughts were saying about it. That it was like the thoughts were contextualizing them and holding them. It was like they had been congealed into some sort of identified memory that I was holding at a distance from myself in the past, or something like that. It was all here. I'd been holding this here somehow through this effort in an energetic and felt way, with this enormous amount of mental activity and this enormous amount of focus on something that's not that, an avoidance of that. With that, I could actually feel the physical sensation of the emotion. And as I felt it, as I let go into this pure and pristine open presence, it was almost like it was freed up out of this congealed identity. It's like the thoughts couldn't hold that, but they were trying to, and that's what created the resistance. All it had to be done was it had to be felt. So it started moving. So in that, I felt like this trauma was leaving my body and being released into infinity. This continued for, it's still going on. it's still going on. As realization deepened, as the physical structure of reality started to come apart, and I got more deeply and deeply in touch with the non-dual nature of what I am, it's like the structure of this in like a three-dimensional internal world, external world thing, with this internal point of view that is me apart from this. At some point that just switched off, and it was actually really unsettling for a while, because something in my mind switched off. It just simply wasn't there anymore. And it was the internal world that I realised in some form, although it got thinner and thinner, had just been constantly running, constantly tracking experience, relating to, contextualising, identifying with, blah 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 blah. This function had become so out of control and complex that I didn't even notice it was there. I thought it was me. I also didn't notice that it was transient and wasn't there all the time. That it felt like inherently me. But when it clarified for what it is, at some point it just switched off. So then it, like now, it's just empty. This is just, there's no thing in here anymore. It's just empty. The thing in here was the source of all that was almost born from all that. The conditions conspiring through circumstances and experience in time, but it was always built up now. I was like holding the mental projection of an entire life and all its complexities, an entire future and all its complexities within my mind, within my memory. And that's the only way I knew how to function, because that's what was seeming to protect me from what I was scared of, that I was averting from into this internal world. That just switched off. When that switched off, it became clear that why I was doing this, why this had come about, it was to avert from this. That fundamental illusion of me being a separate thing here can't handle life. It can't handle that. It couldn't for me. Other people are more balanced, probably. It can't contain this within its context, within its paradigms, within its relational world. So I was feeling the not rightness of that limit of this illusion. It clarified that I always knew this, I always am this. And it was just pure emptiness. The what seemed to be the external world, the sense experience, fell into where this self used to be and engulfed it. And what moved was all of the emotions that were seeming to be held by this narrative, by this identity. And the emotions moved in a way that's so physical it's hard to describe. Like I've told people this story before. I was walking home from work to my car and I literally just collapsed in the street. I just couldn't even, like, my legs came away from me. It was a movement of emotion that I could actually feel as that and fully and entirely embody. And this, it's like nothing was holding this anymore. Nothing was holding it back. And that included the sense experience. The sense experience so intense, so vivid, so mysterious that I could see why I was turning away from it, because it's too much. I described, like, during meditation where before it would be like me here, silent, my thoughts coming, going, some sounds and this. After the realization of anatta, it's just like buzzing with aliveness, energy, like this, with such intensity, but at the same time with such peace. Whenever there was a movement to hold a position in that of me, it was so uncomfortable because of the pure, vivid, intense aliveness of this experience. Like the sense experience is a miracle. It's incredible. It's just ridiculous. Like, I was ignoring that because the me that I had generated was scared of that. Couldn't handle it because it wasn't even there. It was trying to live a life from something that didn't exist. Of course it wasn't right. And this emptiness of what I guess you could say what I am, that isn't a self, everything opened up, and there was a great relaxation. And there was a point where there wasn't even an aversion to the emotions anymore. And I realised that the emotions in themselves are a beautiful experience. You know, it's like the emotions came through that I couldn't even describe to you, that weren't even able to be boxed in by the definitions of this emotion and that emotion. It couldn't be described by an identity. It's happening to me, like non-human emotion, transcendent, universal emotions of God type thing. And this just seemed to move, like waves. It came in waves. So there would be like this emotional expression coming into experience, moving as it does in a timeless way right now, and then there'd be like an insight type thing, clarity, and then it kind of cycled through that in a very natural way, and it seemed to do so in a way that was trusting and safe. Like, it didn't give me too much than I could handle. It had a timing to it, it had a rhythm to it, it had synchronicity to it, that all moved. And it's like the emotions that were held in identity were released into infinity, and when they're released, there's no holding there. Any emotion can come into experience, anything can come into experience, and it's deeply and fundamentally okay, because there's no me in that struggling to relate to it. There's no internal world trying to figure it out. Those limitations are gone. A simplicity that is too simple to describe. It's empty openness. The stillness, the silence in which the world pours into, the sense experience moves through. So I would class emotions as a sensory experience. what was wrapped up with them was the thoughts, the narratives, the complex thoughts and narratives that there's a recognition, there's a noticing of this from the point of view of a self, and then all the false stuff that tries to construct a coping mechanism around it. I literally just, those coping mechanisms fell to bits. It just fell to bits with that. Something stopped happening. So there was nothing that could be apart from the visceral sensory experience in its totality. There was nothing that could hold an apartness from the empathic emotions that I feel in what I am, which is the external world. It's not apart from me anymore, so I can't separate myself from the suffering of others, the pain, the emotions of others. You feel it all, and it falls into, is released into this space infinitely released into this emptiness, this unknowable emptiness that is clear in experience. Because there's no personal self here blocking that up, you can accept it all in, and it's deeply peaceful, deeply okay, although it's intense. It's deeply peaceful and deeply okay. One of the things that I don't particularly agree with, and nowhere near matches my experiences in some of the Buddhist traditions, I've heard some realized monks talk about how the emotions, as realization comes about, as no self comes about, the emotions go away, so then there's no experience of emotion. That's not my experience with this. Personally, I can see why they're saying that. Personally, there isn't that personal emotion there anymore, but was never a true emotion, because it was the interpretation of a sense experience with thought from a point of view. That goes away. What you do feel is the emotions as yourself, as the entire world, including all the suffering. But because there's no resistance to that, it's deeply okay. And you can accept it as yourself, to fall infinitely into this pristine emptiness. So then this even transcends suffering, because suffering doesn't end in the world, and there's no separation. So you are the world, you are the other people, if you could say it in a limited way like that. So then there's a great relaxation, a great opening. The healing goes on infinitely right now. Whatever comes up, there is the release of that into the infinite. It just is what it is, and it starts to become apparent that it's all conditions, interconnected conditions, interacting with themselves, expressing themselves in a way that there's no way there could be a self in that. It's too close, it's too connected. It's not even connected, it is everything. And there's no meaning in it, but there's kind of like a there's just a profound beauty in it that transcends any position you could take on it, any point of view you could form on it. Is replaced with the pure experience. And suddenly all these conditions that gave rise to this suffering and going onto this path and waking up seem masterful. Like there's a masterful wisdom in that transcends understanding completely. So it's just the conditions interacting with themselves, expressing themselves as this, without any limitation, without any separation. And this just continues to deepen, continues to be felt, and felt to a deeper, clearer, more simplistic and beautiful way. So that's my story about trauma, right, that I'm framing this way, based on my experience. A lot of people were asking, I can see in the way people are talking that there's a wisdom there, there's an intuition there, there's a clarity there at some level that might seem to be obscured by what's being added to it as a narrative, me on a path. A point of view taken, a position taken in relation to my emotion that's being experienced now, that I don't want to feel this, like I described, but I can see in the way people are talking to me that that's there, that wisdom's there expressing itself through those conditions. And people are saying to me, I need to feel the emotion. Something's stopping me feeling this, or going there, or letting go into that. And you know, I let go into that, and I'm letting go into that, and I'm fine. I'm fine. It was the dangerous thing was the obstruction, the identity that was formed that tried to deal with that. That when people are talking to me, I can see them describing that. So I deeply feel that people know where to go. I have a deep faith and trust in people on this path, that it's happening the way it's happening, which can only be the way it is, can only be the right way, because that's the only way it is. So feel as much as you can. Any of the expressions of trauma, of this holding, of this experiencing as this identity, it gets very simple because it all expresses now. I didn't necessarily have to go back to the past. It was all here. The past was something generated in my mind, now appearing as a thought. It's already here. So we don't have to go anywhere else. We just connect more and more deeply with our experience as it is now, open up to it, and it might come in bits. It came in bits for me because intuitively there was a feeling. I described this in a Reddit post I made. It was like something was saying, don't go too deep, hold off from that, and I kind of trusted that, and it just expressed the way it did. It deepened when it did, in a kind of masterful way. And the movements still come, albeit there's not much of that in experience now. Now and again I do get this wave that comes up that has a very obvious signature to it, of this solipsistic existential thing, this personal identity. It's not a thing now, it just waves, it just moves up. Whoa, I feel it. I'm like, whoa, there. And then it releases out into infinity. So that's all the self is now, just like it comes and goes sometimes, and it's replaced with this, I can't describe it, but when there's no internal world, when it's this thing that has always seemed to be here, that needs to be here to relate to my life, to constantly narrate and continually function as just this, ends up being a parrot, but then it goes deeper, and it's like a felt internal narrative. When that's just not there, it's like a context, it's like just a tendency. When that's not there, I can't describe what that's like. It was unsettling for a while, because it's like this thing that I'm so used to being here, that's relating to my life, that I felt like it had to be here, just isn't there. And there's something about that feels weird. It doesn't feel right. It feels like it should be there. So there's this, people talk about the restlessness. It's like, I can't describe it. It's like, it seems like something should be there and it's not. Eventually that goes away, and it relaxes into just what's here. Like, I've been quoting the Bahaya Sutta recently, and because I'm talking to people who are going through this, and seeing only the seen, only the heard, I would put into that only the felt, so physical sensation, the energetic feeling, the of the environment interacting with itself through conditions. Nothing in that like a self. Just pure, empty, pristine clarity, vivid aliveness. Incomprehensible mystery that doesn't need to be interpreted in any way. So to put this into practice, I'm running out of time. When there is this emotion that moves, and it comes about due to conditions, it's not my emotion. Something about the environment and what's happening through the conditions, through the conditioning that's here, brings about this emotional movement. It's like something comes up and it takes you, you feel it, you're like, oh, and then there's going to be a gap there, like we talked about the first and the second arrow, where there will be like something switches on to try and control that. Something seems to arise up with that. If there can be, like with everything, there kind of has to be like a gap or a distinction recognized and experienced between what is the sensation, what is the real emotion, the feeling, and what is being added to that in thought. And it has the effect of it's like a coping mechanism. It has the effect of coming up to control, to rationalize, to manage, to relate, to get away from, to move towards, something like that. It's a tricky thing to let that go, because there's a unknowableness of what that emotion is without that we've built up to try and control it. And it's intense when we're direct with the emotion, when we allow it to move. It just kind of shows us that we're not in control. Because of its mysterious nature, because of its powerful ability to embody this experience, or this experience to embody that fully, such that everything is that without separation. The anger, the sadness, the whatever emotion, even joy, you could say everything is that. There isn't separation between that and anything else. So it's like we try and separate from that, but if we can keep noticing that every strong emotion that moves, or you even feel, or is supercharged by interacting with other people, you can use that as your opportunity. There's a perfect opportunity there that you've asked for, because you're waking up. It's a perfect opportunity. It's not a backslide or backwards regression in your spiritual progress. It's the perfect opportunity to clarify this even more. So the more the better. The more you can feel, the better. And that includes, coping mechanisms that we use to stop ourselves empathically feeling other people's emotions, to separate into a separate identity. So then you feel other people's emotions with them, and there's a beauty in that, because it entirely transcends, in this immediate and energetic way, the separation. So there's like a symbiosis there, like a transcendence of the boundaries of separation of me and you that can be felt. So whenever that comes up, use that as an opportunity to practice, so to speak, this clarity, to feel deeper and see clearer, to feel deeper more directly, to see clearer more simply. And when there's, when I watched or talked to People who the internal world wasn't present. I could feel that too, and I could see myself in that. There was a recognition of myself in that. It was almost like I was being pulled into the emptiness, pulled into the void, pulled into the intimacy of directness, the simplicity of what you are. So if you watch this and you can feel that emptiness, you can feel that clarity, I would suggest that that's, as I always say, your own clarity. Embody that simplicity, that stillness, that silence completely. And then within that and as that, not apart from that, these emotions move as they do always right now. Embody that fully, let it be what it is without resisting it, without having to change it. So based on that story I just told you, that when you feel these strong emotions and you feel like I shouldn't be feeling this, maybe it's perfect. Maybe it's conditions aligning themselves in a masterful way to bring about liberation. Maybe the way it happens will equip you with the skills or tools or experience you need to help other people through this when they're going through it. Because you know it's deeply okay. Anyway, I think that'll do for now. Not sure if I went off topic there, if that's what you were looking for. I can maybe talk a little bit more in future videos, the practical sense of the practical approaches that I used with the emotion work, or shadow work it's called sometimes. And like I talked before about the first and the second arrow. But you can let me know if that's interesting to you, and I'll talk to you next time.